Welcome to Eastern Washington University 452 Standards-Based Unit Planning, a critical foundation for equity, and sponsored by Excel Education Resources. My name is Dr. Janine Butler, and I'm excited to partner with you in engaging in a critical equity move through standards-based unit planning. None of us need more busy work. The only reason to engage in standards-based unit planning is to dismantle the persistent academic growth and achievement gaps among students by demographics and program, examine the role of integrated multi-tiered systems of support in addressing gaps, identify non-negotiable elements of effective Tier 1 practices necessary for closing growth and achievement gaps, and to engage students as assessment partners to see themselves in their work in order to build growth mindset and self-agency toward equitable practices and outcomes. Take a few moments and review the learning targets for this course. The success criteria for this course is that you will apply what you learned by engaging and remodeling a unit of study of your choice. You will also provide evidence along the way through unit activities and unit reflections. There have been many books and articles written over the past 20 years or more that describe the research and role that standards-based unit planning plays in achieving effective instruction that closes student learning gaps. This slide shows some key educational resources that support this work and that will be referenced throughout this course. Handout number 2 provides a more detailed list of references. Additionally, we will be exploring some important and helpful online resources. These will include foundational resources such as the Smarter Balanced Content Explorer and Achieve the Core, as well as resources for all content areas, including CTE, found on the Washington State OSPI website. There are 10 units in this course, and this slide, along with handout number 1 in your resources, provides a general idea of the content for each unit. There are several articles and handouts that will be referred to throughout this course. Of most importance are the Unit Reflections handout number 4, on which you will answer key questions and record your thinking, as well as the Literature Review handout number 3, which provides a structured way to reflect upon any articles or literature to which you may refer. Additionally, you will find activity information and assignment rubrics, which will be explained along the way. Now let's get started on Unit 1 of Standards-Based Unit Planning. In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed into law the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, known as ESEA, which aimed to improve educational equity and opportunity by providing funding to school districts that serve low-income students. While progress has been made, the ultimate goals of ESEA still remain unrealized today, as educational opportunity remains unequal for students. Prior to 2000, special education referral was based upon the discrepancy model. Educators and psychologists recognized major weaknesses due to IQ and other test biases for students of color and poverty who were referred to special education at a disproportionate level. These students languished in special education classes. In the 70s and 80s, psychologists worked to develop a new framework using a team approach to systematic student learning. As a result, response to intervention, or RTI, was developed and believed to benefit students because students received grade-level opportunities to learn through increased or specialized instruction prior to being referred to special education. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, of 2004 further encouraged the use of RTI as an alternative to traditional special education services. Multi-tiered Systems of Support, or MTSS, is the latest iteration of this framework that helps educators integrate academic and behavioral strategies for students with various needs. MTSS grew out of the integration of both RTI and the PBIS framework. Whereas the response to intervention model of assessment originally sought to identify students who would benefit from more intensive supports, MTSS has grown to encompass all students at every level. This slide provides a review of the 3 tiers of MTSS. Take note that Tier 1 is the foundation for the entire framework. In their book, Integrated Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, McIntosh and Goodman make clear that MTSS requires high-quality universal Tier 1 instruction and that Tiers 2 and 3 service to provide additional support. Note the adjective additional support in order that students are successful in Tier 1. All of this work is informed by database decisions, so both universal screening and progress monitoring are essential. Collaboration is also a key aspect of effective MTSS, including effective Tier 1 instruction. This is the often cited graphic illustrating multi-tiered systems of support. Although this graphic is widely used and helpful in understanding MTSS, throughout the years and across many districts and schools, I have discovered misunderstandings about what this graphic is conveying. It is a misunderstanding to think that it means 80% of students will be in Tier 1 and the rest in Tiers 2 and 3. What this graphic is saying is that if you have effective Tier 1 instruction, then at least 80% of your students should be proficient. Global research has shown that if Tier 1 is effective, only about 20% of students will struggle and need additional support. Global research has also indicated that only about 2 to 5% of the human population truly have learning disabilities. This is why RTI, or Response to Intervention, was first initiated in the early 2000s, because in some schools, almost a quarter of the students were identified as special education. The MTSS system was developed to mitigate the over-identification of students in special education, and again, effective Tier 1 instruction is a critical foundation. Because of the misunderstandings around the triangle of MTSS, this graphic may be more helpful. In this case, it is made clear that all students receive Tier 1 instruction first, while some students receive additional support, which could occur, by the way, in the Tier 1 environment, and a few students will receive intensive support. Educational researcher Robert Marzano also maintains the importance of all students having access to effective Tier 1 instruction by calling upon the schooling system to ensure a guaranteed and viable curriculum. He goes into detail about the importance of this practice in his book, The High Reliability School and Leading the High Reliability School. While this course is intended to have a focus on the importance of effective Tier 1 academic instruction for all, integrated MTSS also includes the importance of effective Tier 1 behavioral and social emotional learning supports. As you work through this course, you might consider remodeling PBIS behavioral or SEL units of study that occur in Tier 1. By following the link on this slide, you will access an article from Sugai, Horner, and Gresham from 2002 that helps elucidate this aspect of MTSS. Now, pausing this presentation, take some reflection time. Using Unit Reflections handout number 4, consider the connections between standards-based unit planning, MTSS, and equity. Examine your system. Do all students have the opportunity for grade-level learning and experiences? Do you have fall and spring universal screening for all students to identify learning needs and monitor effectiveness of instruction via student growth? Do you have frequent formative assessments for learning for each and every learner? Again, to identify learning needs and monitor effectiveness of instruction via student growth? Are students your assessment partners? Thank you for pausing and engaging in Unit 1, Reflection A. And now we will discuss how analyzing our school's growth data can be a powerful way to establish why to do standards-based unit planning. Analyzing our public student growth data can provide a window into which we can uncover just how effective our Tier 1 instruction may be or not. In this next section, you will be going to the Washington State OSPI report card and examining your Washington School Improvement Framework data, WSIF, as well as your more specific student growth data. It is beyond the scope of this course to go deeply into becoming a data literate school leader, but engaging in your public your public student growth data is an important introduction. In addition to the instruction on these next slides, in your resources you will find Unit 1, Activity Handout Number 5, Steps for Accessing Your OSPI Report Card, which will guide you through this process. Although I will be walking you through the steps on these slides, please pause at any time to utilize Handout Number 5 in examining your report card growth data at your own pace. After accessing the state report card at the website seen at the top of this slide, click on your school's name. On the left-hand side, you will find many data resources. Start by scrolling all the way down to the bottom where you will find the Washington School Improvement Framework, or WSIF, as shown on this slide. Once you click on WSIF and once your data comes up, you will see the tabs above the data. Choose the tab Details. Here you will find an overview of where you are in Washington State by decile. Are you in the top 10%, dark blue, or in the bottom 10%, dark orange? Of most importance is looking at student growth percentiles, or SGP. Are you in the blue or in the orange? Are you growing your students in ELA and math? Now return to the left-hand side data sources and scrolling up the page, find student growth. Again, pause at any time to use handout number 5 at your own pace. When you reach student growth, click on the tab Details. What percentage of your students have low growth, average growth, high growth? Remember, this is about growth, not proficiency. So you could have students at level 3 and 4 whose scale scores have not changed over the year and who are not growing. Even though they may be proficient, these students may still be experiencing low growth. This can provide information as to the effectiveness of your Tier 1 instruction. Up at the top of the report card and to the right, you will see a tab titled Diversity Report. Now please click on that. Again, utilize handout number 5, which lays out the steps for accessing all this data. Then on the data sources on the left-hand side, find student growth again, and now click on Growth by Student Characteristic and Program. We are looking now at the same student growth data we have reviewed in the previous 2 slides, but now we are looking at it by student program and characteristic. This is another powerful report that helps a school leader plan for deep discussions with staff to surface inequities and identify potential problems of practice. As this process deepens with staff, the school leader can then assist collaborative work in determining potential theories of action that might address and dismantle such inequities. Again, pause as needed using handout number 5 for slides 16 through 18. If you want to go even deeper into examining your data to determine the effectiveness of your Tier 1 instruction, you can access your protected data in the Washington Comprehensive Assessment Program, or WCAP, to review your Smarter Balanced Target Reports. These will tell you in which learning targets students are proficient or not. You can even create a chart to show your 3-year trends. Even though it is beyond this course to go into the detail around this slide provides an example of how one district created a Smarter Balanced ELA target report showing their 3-year trend, where green shows where students are reaching proficiency in each target and red shows in which targets they were below proficiency. Here's an example of 3-year target trends in mathematics. How effective is this school's Tier 1 instruction? Might they benefit from standards-based unit planning? It cannot be stated enough. This is about student growth. If you have effective Tier 1 instruction, your students should be growing. Using your student growth data is a powerful way to determine if your Tier 1 instruction is effective and can help you establish why you may benefit from standards-based unit planning. Take a few moments now, and again using handout number 5, Unit 1 Activity, Access your student growth report card data and reflect upon your school's growth. What does your report card say about your school's student growth? What does your WSIF data detail show with regard to student growth percentiles, or SGP, and English learner progress? After engaging in the student growth data review using handout number 5, then use handout number 4, unit reflections, to consider the questions for this Unit 1 activity. Thank you for completing Activity 1, as well as reflecting upon your school's growth. As we move toward completion of Unit 1, Wise Standards-Based Unit Planning, Connections to Equity and MTSS, the next few slides will help to ensure clear operational definitions for the work we are about to engage in. First, it is important to emphasize that we are held accountable to the Washington State Learning Standards and Targets, and we are held accountable for evidence of student growth toward these targets, as we have just seen. In the previous activity, you reviewed that important student growth data for which we are held accountable. Hence, whenever we reference Washington State Standards and Targets, we are referencing the curriculum. The materials we might use to help deliver that instruction are simply the instructional materials. They are not the curriculum. They are simply a potential resource for delivering effective instruction toward the standards and learning targets, which comprise the curriculum. Additional key operational definitions include target, standard, instructional outcome, learning intentions. A target refers to an assessment measure, whereas a standard refers to specific learnings within a target. This is an important distinction for Washington State's Smarter Bounce ELA and math assessments. Here is one way to look at this distinction. For example, when we go to the doctor for our annual physical, they first measure our targets. They check our main targets of weight, blood pressure, heart rate, and blood results. If our targets look fine, they go no deeper. We're basically good to go. However, if something looks ominous and is outside the normal range, they will begin to dig, going deeper with more testing and results. For example, if we have high blood pressure, they will dig deeper into the standards underlying blood pressure, such as kidney function, eating habits, and exercise, or other diagnostic assessments. We will examine this concept much more deeply when we begin to explore the online resource of Smarter Bounce Content Explorer in several upcoming units. And by the way, whether we refer to a target or a standard, they are both instructional outcomes or learning intentions, so we use these terms interchangeably. Finally, on this slide are listed other key operational definitions. A proficiency scale is just that, a scale that outlines levels of proficiency. Achievement level descriptors, or ALDs, are very specific proficiency scales explicitly describing a specific target. The Level 3 proficiency scale, achievement level descriptor, equals the success criteria. It defines what it looks and sounds like when a student is proficient on that target. And while a proficiency scale links to a target, or a specific unit of study, a rubric is designed for a specific task that elicits evidence as to a student's proficiency level. Finally, a learning progression lays out the learning journey or growth of a student along the way. For example, a learning progression could follow a particular target or targets, such as fractions, from 3rd through 5th grade. Pause now, and using the course unit reflections handout number 4, reflect upon and write about your current understandings and questions around the definitions of these following terms. The foundations of standards-based unit planning are meant to build conceptual understanding, provide student clarity and access to standards-based learning targets or intentions for each and every learner, Provide student clarity of proficiency scales and success criteria to develop growth mindset. Establish pre-informative assessments to guide teachers and students in a partnership to ensure student growth. And to engage students as assessment partners throughout the unit to ensure culturally responsive teaching and learning. Standards-based unit planning is also implicated in all of our Washington State instructional frameworks, whether they be Marzano's Cell 5 or Danielson. They iterate that students should not only have clarity about the targets and the scales or success criteria, but should be self-monitoring their own progress. Washington State leadership frameworks also reference the critical importance for clarity of standards and making student learning goals measurable. Additionally, they also advocate for students to not only have clarity about the targets and scales, but also advocate for students as assessment partners as they self-monitor their progress. Finally, I want to provide full disclosure that I have a passionate belief that standards-based unit planning is a critical foundation in realizing equity. In your resources, you will find the article I co-wrote for Washington State ASCD, which explains the process and its connections to effective Tier 1 instruction. It is now time to take a significant pause as we complete Unit 1. Please utilize Literature Review Handout number 3 as you have read any key articles and resources referenced in Unit 1. Then, using Unit Reflection Handout number 4, write down your initial thoughts on the connection between standards-based unit planning and the role of multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS, effective Tier 1 instruction, and as a foundation in realizing equity for each and every one of our learners. After taking a significant pause and reflecting upon Unit 1, we now move to Unit 2, which provides an overview of the foundations of standards-based unit planning and helps illustrate the key elements of an effective standards-based unit of study. We begin with the work of Lynn Erickson, which lays out the structure of knowledge. As the National Research Council emphasized, it is important to organize discrete facts into a conceptual framework. While each unit of study is grounded in facts around a topic, what we are really aiming for is a student's conceptual understanding which engages them at a much higher cognitive level. In this example from social studies, we see the topic is early European migration. We also see the facts accompanying the topic. However, the unit of study does not stop there. Its ultimate goal is for the student to understand that migration leads to cultural diffusion, resulting in social and economic change. These conceptual understandings really are timeless. As we see here, this example was written in 2011. However, it is a highly pertinent and critical topic for our country today. Here is another example from mathematics, which illustrates the measurement of distance and speed using slope. Most of us remember learning about slope and doing pages of slope problems. However, completing assignments, engaging in problems, and graphing slope may not have helped us understand the real purpose and conceptual understanding that velocity can be mathematically represented by the slope of a line. This can be further illustrated in recent developments in the automotive industry, in which we can set our cruise control to determine how many lengths we want to be behind the car ahead of us. This is the point of a unit of study regarding slope, not simply working problems and hoping we got 90% of them correct, but being able to apply our understanding to new and novel real-world scenarios. Throughout this course, many different types of templates will be shared and discussed. This slide shows an example of a template utilized by the work of Lynn Erickson. As in the topic of slope, the point is not filling out the template correctly. The point is to utilize a template that will help you create an effective standards-based unit plan. So ponder the template examples that will be shared and feel free to use the ones you want, or you may want to create your own. The point is to develop an effective unit plan plan, not just to fill out a template. In the mid-1990s, Rick Stegens was an important resource in understanding effective assessment practices. This was a template that assisted me as a principal in helping teacher teams establish effective units of study and then elicit evidence as to students' proficiency and understanding through culminating projects. Again, this is just another template example. A critical and profession-changing event occurred with the publishing of Understanding by Design by Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe. This is seminal work for standards-based unit planning, or backward design, in which you establish your end student learning outcomes before you decide what the activities for the unit might be. Additionally, along with the work of Lynn Erickson, Wiggins and McTighe articulated that any unit of study should have deep understanding as the end goal. To achieve this, they advocated for establishing the big idea prior to the unit, as well as the accompanying essential question, in which students can answer to show that they understand the big idea. Both the big idea and essential questions establish the conceptual understanding and purpose for the unit. Understanding by Design, or UBD as it came to be called, also incorporates a template defined in 3 stages. Stage 1 defines the desired results, Stage 2, the assessment evidence to be used, and Stage 3 outlines the learning activities. Again, note that determining student activities comes last after having defined results, the desired results, and the assessment evidence you will use that will elicit the student's proficiency and growth. This slide shows an example comparing a unit design, which focuses on just topic and activities on the left, versus a fully fleshed out unit developed using Understanding by Design. In Tom Schimmer's book, Standards-Based Learning in Action, Moving from Theory to Practice, he provides another type of template using a flow chart outlining the development of a unit plan. Again, regardless of the template, there are key elements required for effective unit planning that exists in all of these examples. Here's one template example that I created for working with teams of teachers and in helping school leaders understand how to facilitate setting up a standards-based unit planning system. Again, just one more example. After determining the conceptual understanding and purpose of the unit, such as the big idea and essential question, the next element is to identify very clear learning targets and scales for the unit. We will be elaborating on these elements, and you will have a lot of practice remodeling current units of study to ensure that all these elements are reflected in your unit. This slide illustrates important resources around the importance of clear learning targets and scales. Additionally, as stated earlier, this is also called out in the Washington State Instructional and Leadership Frameworks. Clear learning targets and scales are important elements of standards-based unit planning because, as Myron Dweck has stated, everyone benefits when the mystery is removed. In this slide, he articulates strategies for ensuring that students know the learning journey and the road ahead by delivering student-friendly unit plans that align with standards and standards-based assessments, provide clear targets, provide student ownership and self-assessing progress along the way, are used regularly throughout the learning process, uncovers levels of background knowledge or skill deficits early in the unit, and engages learners in teams to provide support and ongoing assessment. Dylan Williams' research also firmly established the importance of ensuring that all students know what quality work looks like because it has a profound impact on achievement gaps. And one of my favorites is from Myron Dweck again. He had been developing and clearly communicating standards-based unit plans and began wondering if it was really making a difference. So he decided to interview students and ask if the unit plans were helpful. And one of his more troubled students, who was actually doing quite well, is quoted in Dweck's book as having said, "If you stop giving out these unit plans, I'm screwed." I love the reality of that example because we know those kinds of students. An effective unit of study is a thing of elegance. It really reduces our workload and stress by providing focused learning, for 6 to 8 units per year and makes it a manageable calendar. There are also clear learning targets for teacher, class, and individual learners, and a clear proficiency scale for monitoring progress and determining next required learning steps. Student self-tracking sheets are provided for student clarity and family communication, and there's clarity of grading and reporting based on the targets and proficiency scale. This slide provides a graphic that illustrates the why of standards-based unit planning. It provides us all, teachers, students, and even families, clarity around where the learner is going, where the learner is now, and how the learner can get there. It is now time for a significant pause to reflect upon Unit 2, Foundations of Standards-Based Unit Planning. Referencing the literature review handout you may have used regarding key resources in Unit 2, now use the Unit Reflection handout number 4 to write down your initial thoughts on the following. What are any new ahas about the foundations of standards-based unit planning around what comprises a unit of study? How might you engage in the process of developing a standards-based unit of study, and how might it be helpful to collaborate with your colleagues? Take time now to reflect upon these questions. After a significant pause in reflecting upon any literature review that you looked at, as well as your reflections, we complete Unit 2 with an assignment informed by both Units 1 and 2. Using both the literature review and unit reflection handouts for Units 1 and 2 and the Unit 1 and 2 assignment rubric, if you are doing this for credit, please write a 3 to 5 page paper on why standards-based unit planning. What are the connections between standards-based unit planning, MTSS, and effective Tier 1 instruction and equity? How might using student growth data help determine the effectiveness of your Tier 1 instruction and establish the need for standards-based unit planning? What might help you determine the effectiveness of your Tier 1 instruction and establish the need for standards-based unit planning? How might you engage in the process of developing a standards-based unit of study? Please make writing this paper applicable to the current reality of your teaching and/or leading. The goal is for this paper not to be busy work, but to inform what your next steps might be in engaging in and potentially leading others in effective Tier 1 instruction that ensures equity for each and every learner. Again, utilize the Units 1 and 2 assignment rubric found in your handouts to guide your thinking and writing. After establishing the why of standards-based unit planning in Unit 1 and 2, in Unit 3, we begin to establish the standards-based learning targets for your unit of study. We start by identifying the units of study for the year. What are the 6, 7, or maybe 8 units of study you have established for the year? Then pick one of these units to consider as we go through the next several units of this course. After choosing the unit to ponder and use for practice along this process, we will then answer the questions. So what? What is the big idea? What essential questions will students be able to answer? What are the overall learning targets or intentions for the unit? What do students need to know, understand, and be able to do? Why even care about this upcoming unit of study? Identifying the big idea and essential question for this unit is a process in and of itself. In some cases, like social studies, these may be suggested for you. Some examples of establishing your big ideas and essential questions include, for ELA writing conventions, why grammar? Why writing conventions? What is it like to read writing that has neglected conventions or has none? For a water unit or water science kit, what would happen if all of our local and state rivers dried up overnight? How might our lives change? It is helpful to establish the big idea and essential question prior to digging into the learning targets and standards. However, it is a process that is not always easy or self-evident. Therefore, it is okay to embark upon establishing the learning targets first, which may help elucidate the conceptual understanding you want students to gain as a result of the unit. For example, even though a high school teacher knew the learning targets for his upcoming quote-unquote sex ed unit, it took him a few weeks to determine the big idea and essential question. Eventually, he realized that the essential question was, what decisions might we make that are a matter of life and death? This slide provides a few examples that we've been discussing about what big ideas and essential questions may look like. As we begin to establish the learning targets for the unit of study, it is helpful to take a look back at the process we used in the early 2000s. At that time, there were far too many standards to address, and they were still quite general and very broad. So Doug Reeves and Larry Ainsworth established processes for identifying power standards and unwrapping those standards. I was fortunate enough to be trained by both these important educational researchers and was given the privilege to facilitate this process over several years with teams of teachers from all over North Central Washington. Although there is still much benefit to engage in some of this work, we now have a lot more clarity around our ELA math and science targets and scales, so some of this work has now been done for us. So as we can see in this slide, Larry Ainsworth has now evolved in his thinking as well, and has recently co-authored the book, Rigorous Curriculum Design, Creating Curricular Units of Study that Align Standards, Instruction, and Assessment. This new book provides much updated guidance in the standards-based unit planning process and will be referenced a lot in this course. As mentioned earlier, over the past few years, we have gained so much more clarity around our standards-based targets and scales, and identifying some of those power standards and scales has been done for us. This slide provides an example of the target reports for ELA found in your protected data in the Washington Comprehensive Assessment Program that we referenced earlier. This slide shows us the ELA targets for informational text. A green check means that 60% or more of your students taking this assessment met proficiency on that specific target. A yellow circle means about 50% of your students met proficiency, and a red triangle indicates that less than 40% of all students taking this assessment met proficiency. If you have the opportunity to review these key targets by accessing your WACAP data, protected data, as we referenced earlier in Unit 1, these are essentially your power standards. You can reflect upon the potential effectiveness of your school's Tier 1 instruction, once again, by examining your target reports. Here's an example of a Smarter Balanced Math Target Report. Again, these math target reports can be powerful for grade level teams since it allows you to analyze the non-negotiable specific math targets required for the entire year and across vertical teams. Any grade level will only have 9 to 13 math targets for the year, which helps identify strengths and weaknesses in a school's Tier 1 mathematics instruction. K2 also has non-negotiable Common Core learning targets in ELA, math, and science. Here is an example regarding the K2 reading foundations and what it means to be proficient in these critical early skills. Note that the target descriptors for phonology, orthography, and morphology start with I can statements, as the targets and scales are meant to engage even K2 learners as our assessment partners. Although this document outlines K2 reading foundations, you may have students in grades 3 through high school that are still struggling readers. These foundations can illuminate what those students may need for additional support in Tiers 2 and 3. How might you assess students grades 3 through high school in phonological awareness? Another important data piece that can be important for K2 is to monitor student growth from the initial Kinder WA Kids data. Instead of simply giving the WA Kids assessment and then leaving it, a powerful move is to monitor students' growth from that assessment. This example shows how one school monitored a particular cohort group, in this case a class of 2028, and tracked their progress from WA Kids to the beginning of 3rd grade using their DIBELS data. Again, The whole point of using this data analysis is to determine the effectiveness of your Tier 1 instruction over time, referencing the non-negotiable targets and scales. Although the focus so far has been ELA and math, the idea of targets and proficiency scales is important for all content areas and grade levels. The Next Gen Science Standards have created an amazing document known as a K-12 DCI, or Disciplinary Core Ideas. For each grade level science topic, they have indicated specific linkage to the ELA and math targets. In this example, we see 5th grade physical science, matter and its interactions, and at the bottom, the linkage to specific math and ELA targets. The ELA targets of reading for informational text and research and inquiry provide important interdisciplinary connections to social studies, science, and health. Keep these interdisciplinary connections in mind as you continue in the standards-based unit planning process throughout this course. Again, we will be referencing important resources from Smarter Balanced, Achieve the Core, and OSPI to establish standards-based targets for your units of study. Before reviewing those resources that can be accessed to establish the learning targets for your unit of study, this slide provides a reminder that there are many templates, including checklists like the example here, that can help in planning a standards-based unit of study. While the process of standards-based unit planning encompasses the steps recommended in these templates, none of these templates are perfect. You might be able to create something that works even better for you or your team. Regardless, keep these templates in mind as you begin to embark upon applying this process to your own chosen unit of study. Again, in your handouts, you will find the Smarter Balanced Content Explorer navigation handout and a handout providing steps in connecting the COVID-19 priorities from Achieve the Core to the Content Explorer. Use a Content Explorer navigation handout for the next activity, which will assist in the understanding of establishing standards-based targets for your unit of study. Take a few moments now and using the handout number 7, Smarter Balanced Content Explorer navigation, access either ELA or the math targets just to practice identifying and establishing standards-based targets for a unit of study. This is a practice activity using an important resource that we will revisit several times throughout this course. Feel free to access any other resources for a specific content area to establish learning targets as well. For example, you might use a Washington State OSPI or the Next Gen Science Standards. After completing Unit 3 activity, reflect then using Unit Reflections handout number 4. Take a significant pause now to engage in the Unit 3 activity and reflection using your handout number 7, Smarter Balanced Content Explorer navigation. I hope you found the Unit 3 activity and reflection illuminating and helpful in establishing the non-negotiable targets for your unit of study. As we complete Unit 3, establishing standards-based unit planning, unit learning targets, and engaging in the Unit 3 activity, now use handout number 4, Unit Reflections, to think and ink around the following. What might guide you in establishing the conceptual understanding you want students to strive for? What resources might you use to identify key standards-based learning targets? What are you thinking about the process of a standards-based unit of study, particularly establishing standards-based learning targets? And how might it be helpful to do this work by collaborating with your colleagues? We now turn to Unit 4, establishing the unit's Level 3 proficiency scales. Unit 4 provides the heart of an effective standards-based unit of study. It helps us establish clarity around what it will actually look like and sound like when students are proficient regarding the end-of-unit learning goals. What will they know, understand, and be able to do? What will be the actual specific evidence that you will elicit to ensure that students are proficient or have grown? In other words, what will be the success criteria for your unit of study? We begin Unit 4, in which we establish the Level 3 proficiency descriptor by first having a solid understanding of what defines and comprises a proficiency scale. Robert Marzano made many early contributions to this concept, and in your resources, you will find a brief Marzano article on how proficiency scales improve teaching and learning. On the left is an example of a generic proficiency scale. Note that 3.0 comprises a target learning goal. Whereas levels 1 and 2 indicate only partial success toward level 3 and at a simpler cognitive level, level 4 comprises cognitive complexity beyond the target learning goal. On the right-hand side is an example personalized for students with I can language. The Common Core is based upon a more specific proficiency scale known as the Depth of Knowledge, or DOK. In order to plan effective standards-based units of studies, it is not only important to know the Washington State learning targets, but also the critical nature of the proficiency scales that underlie and describe the learning progression from level 1 through level 4. This is the basis for growth we were discussing earlier, and which you analyze to determine the effectiveness of your Tier 1 instruction. On the left side of this slide, we see the often referenced DOK wheel, which provides a general look at depth of knowledge and its related important vocabulary. On the right side of the slide, however, we see a more specific description which illustrates that skills and concepts really comprise level 2, and that proficiency is defined by strategic thinking. Also note that level 4 is not that you can teach the target to someone else, nor does it mean you are above grade level. DOK 4 means that you can take the level 3 proficiency and apply it to a new and novel real-world scenario. It means a student can extend their thinking of the level 3 proficiency to synthesizing and solving problems. Understanding the depth of knowledge and the stair-step learning progressions that go with each target provides both unit and lesson planning guidance. This is an example of students self-monitoring their Smarter Balanced results and growth. We will return to this process a little bit later when we talk about students as assessment partners. The point of this slide is to show that knowing the relationships of levels and their scale scores, student is able to see that even if they have a very low level 1 scale score, they can grow to a high level 1 scale score and celebrate that growth. This slide provides an example of a potential proficiency scale for a unit of study developed by a middle school math teacher. Note that the descriptors are written from the item specs, but written in I can statements and are color-coded. While this teacher chose to provide very specific descriptions about levels 1 and 2, level 3 is the one that definitely requires specific descriptions about what a student knows and can do to be proficient. Having a single proficiency scale for an entire unit allows the students to use pre-informative assessment information to determine exactly where they are in the unit's learning journey and to monitor their progress in the unit during their daily lessons. Smarter Balanced also provides us with an amazing resource called the Connections Playlists. These are meant to go with the Smarter Balanced interim assessment blocks, or IABs, but even if you are not using IABs, the playlist provides a one-page summary of the target and proficiency scale to provide guidance in not only identifying students who are below, at or near, or above, but also to inform next steps for effective Tier 1 differentiated instruction or for targeted Tier 2 and 3 additional supports. The Connections playlist can also provide a springboard for collaborative vertical teaming. To go deeper into the importance and specificity of establishing the Level 3 proficiency descriptor or success criteria for the learning target or targets in your unit plan, we will once again explore the Smarter Balanced Content Explorer as one powerful resource. Again, you will be using the Smarter Balanced Content Explorer navigation handout number 7. Following the Content Explorer navigation handout number 7, this slide shows how you will get to all of the math targets for a grade level on one page. In this case, the teacher wants to look more deeply at Target G, create equations that describe numbers or relationships. Following the navigation handout, the teacher now sees achievement level descriptors or proficiency scale for this specific target. Level 3 can be copied and pasted right into a potential tracking sheet. We will now take a significant pause and, using handout number 7, Smarter Balanced Content Explorer navigation once again, access either your ELA or math targets just to practice identifying and establishing the Level 3 proficiency descriptor for a unit of study. This is a practice activity using an important resource that we will revisit several times throughout this course. Feel free to also access any resources such as OSPI or your professional organization such as the Next Gen Science for a specific content area to establish learning targets and proficiency descriptors as well. After completing this Unit 4 activity, reflect on this experience using your Unit Reflections handout number 4. After engaging in the Unit 4 activity and reflection, and reflecting on your experiences with that activity, we will complete Unit 4, establishing the unit's Level 3 proficiency descriptor and success criteria, by reflecting on the following questions using Unit Reflections handout number 4. What resources might you use to identify proficiency scales and success criteria for your unit of study? What are you now thinking about the process of a standards-based unit of study, particularly in establishing the Level 3 proficiency descriptor for the end-of-unit success criteria? Once again, how might it be helpful to collaborate with your colleagues around identifying proficiency scales that provide clear Level 3 success criteria for your units of study? Take a significant pause now to reflect on Unit 4. After establishing the Level 3 proficiency descriptor or success criteria for the standards-based unit of study, it is now important to identify the key vocabulary you will use for the Level 2 descriptor. As you reflect upon the earlier graphic about depth of knowledge, remember that skills and concepts belong in Level 2, which is why vocabulary is key for this Level 2 descriptor. Referencing back to the Smarter Balanced Content Explorer provides us a continued look at this helpful resource. As this slide shows, you will find the key construct relevant vocabulary as you continue to scroll down into the detailed information about your specific target. The construct relevant vocabulary provided by the Content Explorer can also provide guidance in ensuring a guaranteed and viable curriculum throughout multi-tiered systems of support. These example vocab cards provide the math target, the Level 3 proficiency descriptor, and in the middle, the math vocabulary. As teams of teachers develop common language around the construct relevant vocabulary for each learning target necessary for students to grow toward the Level 3 proficiency descriptor, it becomes easier for both teachers and students to monitor where they are now along the learning journey of the unit and where they need to go next. The importance of establishing the key vocabulary for Level 2 of the unit's proficiency scale is also found in the word meaning targets from the Smarter Balanced ELA targets for both literary and informational text. This slide shows the learning progression for Target 10 word meanings informational text from grades 3 through high school. Take a few moments now, pause this presentation, and reflect on how going deeper into the descriptions for the word meanings targets might contribute to effectively identifying key vocab for your unit. You will also find in your resources handout number 10, which lays out the word meanings learning progressions for grades 3 through high school. As we consider multi-tiered systems of support throughout the standards-based unit planning process, it is critical to consider students who might be English learners, as well as students who lack important background knowledge in language development for whatever reason. This leads us to consider the connection of Smarter Balanced ELA targets to the WIDA English Language Development Standards Framework. Both the learning progressions for Smarter Balanced word meanings targets 3 through high school and the language use targets are implicated in this step of the process. In a previous slide, we looked at the Smarter Balanced word meanings targets for 3rd through high school. We now go more deeply into Target 14, language use for informational text. Again, take a significant pause now, stopping this presentation, reflect on the language use learning progression, and reflect upon implications for identifying key vocabulary for your standards-based unit of study. Again, in your resources, you will find the Language Use Targets Learning Progression handout number 11. Another resource for this step in the standards-based unit planning process might be the Connections playlist for language and vocabulary use shown on this slide. Again, the connection to the WIDA ELD standards for our English learners and other students with language gaps can be an important contribution to effectively identifying key vocab for your unit of study. WIDA also incorporates the concept of proficiency level descriptors for their standards as well, which can also provide beneficial information. You are highly encouraged to explore and examine the WIDA language development standards and proficiency level descriptors and the connections to the Smarter Balanced language use and word meanings targets to inform effective identification of your unit's level 2 key vocabulary. WIDA provides many useful resources to deepen our knowledge of ways to embed language development into all of our standards-based unit planning. The link to the WIDA English Language Development Standards can be found at the link at the top of this page. It is now time to stop this presentation and take a significant amount of time in Unit 5 to reflect and write about identifying key vocabulary for the Level 2 descriptor. What resources might you use to identify key standards-based vocab for your unit of study? Why should vocabulary be an integral part of the Level 2 descriptor of the proficiency scale? What are any of your initial thoughts on connections to WIDA? If you explore the K2 resources found in Common Core and other Marzano resources, what are any new ha-has about K2 work in this area? How might building a standards-based vocab system in our schools ensure student growth? Please now use your Unit Reflections handout number 4 and take time to ponder what you've learned in Unit 5. Welcome to Unit 6, in which we establish rigor and relevance in the Level 4 descriptor of the unit's proficiency scale, as well as integrate student voice. By inviting students to choose the evidence they will provide as they apply the proficiency achieved in the unit, we are embracing culturally relevant instructional strategies, as well as implementing a key element in our quest for equity. Now that you have established the clear, specific Level 3 proficiency descriptor or success criteria for your unit of study, as well as identified the key vocabulary to include in your Level 2 descriptor, we can begin to complete the full proficiency scale for the unit of study. As we learned from both the generic Marzano proficiency scale and the proficiency scale of the depth of knowledge, or DOK, Level 1 represents simple cognitive tasks such as recall and reproduction. Level 4, however, represents the highest level of cognitive complexity and is best described as the ability to apply the Level 3 proficiency attained to a new and novel real-world scenario. Level 4 does not mean I can teach this to someone else or that I am above grade level. Level 4 references higher level cognitive complexity. This is where it can be helpful to unwrap the Level 4 descriptor to gain greater clarity around what this evidence might look like. For example, on this slide, we see a 7th grade math target A, which calls for students to be able to analyze proportional relationships and use them to solve real-world and mathematical problems. The Level 4 descriptor states that students should be able to solve real-world problems involving proportional relationships and measurement conversions in various formats, for example, verbally, tabular, graphically, in a contextual scenario that involves identifying relationships between elements presented in various formats. Teachers can unpack this Level 4 descriptor by focusing on key nouns and verbs. For example, what is really meant by proportional relationships and measurement conversions? And what is meant when they are referring to various formats, such as verbally, tabular, graphically? It would be critical to find out if students even understand the vocabulary, as well as what is meant by contextual scenario. How might we facilitate our learners toward competence and confidence at a Level 4 cognitive complexity? Another effective strategy to deeply unpack what is meant by the Level 4 descriptor for targets would be to explore example task models, such as those from the Smarter Bounds Content Explorer. In this example, we can see that for grade 7 target A, they are asking students to represent the total cost of electricity when operating the business for 6 hours. Again, it is application to new and novel real-world scenarios. It is time now to pause this presentation and take some significant time to engage in the Unit 6 activity, accessing Smarter Bounds Content Explorer to ensure rigor and relevance in the Level 4 descriptor. Using that Smarter Bounds Content Explorer navigation handout number 7, now going all the way through steps 9A, access either ELA or math targets to practice and examine the Level 4 descriptor to gain greater insight in facilitating higher cognitive complexity for your students in a unit of study. Feel free to also access any resources for a specific content area to clarify and unpack level descriptors for higher cognitive complexity and relevant application to real-world scenarios in your specific content. After completing this Unit 6 activity, reflect on this experience using your unit reflection handout number 4. Achieving excellence and equity in U.S. schools has been a quest for many decades, and yet somehow it continues to elude us. Perhaps the focus has emphasized the thoughts and actions of the adults in the system and has not fully embraced the thoughts and actions of the students. As we will discuss in Unit 8, perhaps a missing element in achieving equity is engaging students as our assessment partners. As Goldie Mohammed powerfully states in her book, Cultivating Genius, an equity framework for culturally and historically responsive literacy, students must see themselves in their learning. What if we allowed students to choose how they might apply the Level 3 descriptor and success criteria to a new and novel real-world scenario of their own choice to provide Level 4 evidence? In the case of ratios of proportional relationships that we just looked at, a student might choose to design a quilt, create a unique house plan, show how ratios are important in engine repair, or team up with others to demonstrate ratios and proportional relationships in the arts. It is now time once again to pause this presentation and take significant time to reflect upon Unit 6, Establishing Rigor and Relevance in Level 4 through Student Voice. How might you unpack Level 4 descriptors for deeper clarity and how to facilitate students to higher levels of cognitive complexity? What are implications of ensuring Level 4 evidence allows students to apply Level 3 to a new and novel real-world scenario? How does this ensure rigor and relevance for your unit of study? How will you encourage student voice so that learners can apply unit targets to a new and novel real-world scenario of their own choice? How might this be a culturally responsive instructional strategy toward equitable student outcomes?